Hello guys, welcome back to Fanfic Dojo. Today we will be listening to What If Naruto Traveled to Past and Fell in Love with Mito Part 1. The last 20 years in the elemental nations had been one of the darkest times in recorded history. The Fourth Shinobi World War wreaked havoc and chaos through all towns and villages throughout the lands. There were no longer any sort of sanctuary available to the innocent people of the world. Even the tiniest creek in the most isolated lands were filled with bloodshed and slaughter. 2 decades ago the world had a population of over 50 million people, but the number had dwindled down to a mere 10 million because of the war. The evil forces of Uchiha Madara swept the lands of peace and life. No one would be safe as long as the man was alive. For the first time in history, all nations in the lands banded together to fight against one enemy, but they were not winning. The wicked forces of the Uchiha had proven to be far too much for the feeble might of the allied shinobi nations. The legendary Uchiha had employed some of the darkest jutsu in existence to ensure the defeat of his enemies and the success of his puesto peaceful world. The ever-expanding population of Zetsus virtually gave Madara unlimited amount of troops, and their average power was higher than that of an average Chunin. The price was too high, for very Zetsu dead would even out to be 2 humans sacrificed. The human population had grown pessimistic and hopeless. No one believed that the allied forces would ever defeat the superpower of Uchiha Madara. It was far too great a task for any man. These negative thoughts were only fueled by the consecutive deaths of the 5 kage of the elemental nations. The supposedly all-powerful beings of each nation had been discarded as weaklings by the truly all-powerful Uchiha, and it was by their deaths that many people had given up on the war. But like all stories ever written in history, there was always a dim light shining magnificently in the midst of the darkest times. Since 10 years ago Uzumaki Naruto had been the supreme commander of the allied shinobi forces, and he had been battling gallantly against the Uchiha and his forces. It was only because of the Uzumaki that the humans have survived so long against Madara and his Moonzai plan. Back at the start of the war Madara and his minion Uchiha Obito managed to revive the Jubi, but that plan was scrapped when Naruto and the previous Hokage all banded together to rip OT apart. With the aid of the most powerful shinobi to ever live, Naruto managed to seal some of the Jubi's power into himself, rendering the Moonzai plan useless. Naruto had taken an equivalent amount of another Kyuubi from the Jubi, just enough to make it not powerful enough for Madara to employ his plan. It was by a very thin margin. If Naruto himself had a quart less of chakra, the world would have already been under Madara's control for over 2 decades. Things were looking quite well. But that was when Madara forcefully revived himself by using his control over Obito to force him to use the Gedo Rinne Tensai no Jutsu outer path, Samsara of heavenly life technique, and revive him to his original form. With his true body Madara angrily captured all the previous Hokage with the power of his Rinnegan and pulled their souls out with his Kyukin no Jutsu soul absorption technique. With the loss of the previous kage, Naruto was left alone with his feeble power. It was also at that point that Uchiha Sasuke decided to join over with his ancestor. Naruto knew that he stood no chance against the combined power of the 2 eternal Mangekyo Sharingan users, and he had to survive to preserve the survival of the world. If Madara managed to kill Naruto, he would have gathered more than enough power to use his Moonzai plan, and that would mean the end of the human era. There was no way that Naruto or anyone in the allied forces could allow that to happen, so there was only one priority in everyone's minds at that point: get Uzumaki Naruto off the battlefield. Against the power of the Uchiha, many people were slaughtered while Naruto made his escape. The Uzumaki didn't know most of them, so that saved him part of the guilt, but 2 people died at that point that changed Naruto forever. Haruno Sakura and Hyuga Hinata had both sacrificed themselves for the sake of their love and leader. From that point on there was no way that peace could ever be reached between Naruto and Madara. The world was too small for both of them to live. After that, Naruto was promoted to the supreme commander of the shinobi forces and had been leading his men into battle ever since. It was 10 years ago that Naruto had finally killed Uchiha Sasuke. The vision of the Elder Toad was very true in the end. Naruto did end up fighting with Sasuke, and it was a death battle. It was clear to Naruto that they could never go back to what they once were, and he would kill Sasuke for the lives of the many men that had been sacrificed because of him. Naruto was no longer fighting for personal revenge for reasons, he was fighting for the very survival of the shinobi and humans alike, no matter what the Uchiha needed to die. With the full power of the Kyuubi and the chakra he absorbed from the Jubi, Naruto wiped Sasuke of the face of the earth with a full power Bijudama. It was a long and arduous battle, but Naruto was victorious in the end. Uchiha Sasuke was nothing more than a burnt crater on the face of the earth, and there was only one more Uchiha left in the world. In the midst of the largest forest of Hai no Kuni was a large crater that used to be Konohagakure no Sato. It had been made by a rampage by Uchiha Madara himself 5 years ago, and no one had even bothered to clean the area of the debris. The area had become known as a place of bad omen and many people tend to avoid the entire forest, so the place had become one of the rare quiet places Naruto could find in the distressed world. In the past 5 years, whenever he had time Naruto would teleport to the place where the place his home once stood using his father's Hiraishin no Jutsu, and cleaned the place by himself. He would never use any of his clones to help him because it was a hobby that he didn't want to finish so quickly. Whenever Naruto would come to the large crater and clear the area of the debris and dust he would find the slightest bit of solace from his heavy responsibility, and it kept him sane. "Hey Tu-chan," muttered a Naruto in his mid-30s as he planted some seeds in the soil of the crater. "How are you and Ka-chan up in heaven?" Naruto would always talk to the previous Hokage by himself whenever he would visit the area, but mostly he would only talk to his father. The Hokage monument was totally destroyed, but the mountain that once housed them was still left slightly standing, so Naruto would view it as a monolith with spirit. Naruto would never talk about the war or his hardships to his father. He would only strike causal conversations that he would have loved to share with his father if he was still alive. "I got another couple of confessions again this week," exclaimed Naruto with a smile that was not unlike the one he used in his youth, which was a great relief to his own conscience. He didn't want to become a sulker and emotion reek like many people under his command. "They were pretty cute, but they were too shy and that kind of put me off." The most power man in the shinobi forces had never had a steady girlfriend in the past 20 years, most knew why. He just could get over the fact that the woman who loved him and the woman he loved died for his sake. Naruto doesn't think about Hinata and Sakura nearly as much anymore, and that was a good sign, but everyone including Naruto himself knew that the two girls would always be in his heart no matter how much time have passed. "I am not bragging, but I have gotten even better looking than you two-chan," said Naruto with a chuckle as he started to plant his next seed. At the age of 36 Naruto was basically a clone of his late father. They had the same eyes, hair, facial structure and even body shape. It surprised Naruto as he grew as he tended to take from his mother more than his father in his youth, but apparently that was not true, although he still shared his Uzumaki chakra with his mother. Naruto was happy that he looked like his father and mother. It made him feel as though they were living on inside him. "And even you have to admit it. I have a cooler Haori than you," muttered Naruto as he concentrated on his planting. As the supreme commander of the Shinobu forces, Naruto had to dress more conspicuously than others, and he had focused the design of his uniform like his father's. Being true to his home, Naruto wore the standard Konoha Junin uniform under his Haori, which was somewhat like his father's, but it had blue waves on the bottom instead of flames, and it read, "Supreme Commander," instead of the Yondaime Hokage. "It is time, Naruto," muttered a familiar voice from within Naruto just as the man was finished planting the very last seed needed for the crater. After 5 years of cleaning up, Naruto had finally finished, and in a few years the forest would be back to what it once was. "I can feel the Zetsus coming already. You have about 3 minutes left." "Okay. Thanks, Kurama." It has become clear to Naruto that with only 5% of his men left, there was no way that he could win the war, so in order to defeat Madara, he had to cheat. The Supreme Commander had been working on one Fuinjutsu for the last 19 years, and he had finally finished it 1 year ago. It had always been a backup plan of a sort for Naruto, and he never hoped that he would end up using it, but now it was the only chance of survival for humankind, so there was no choice in the matter. Naruto had created a seal that would allow him to travel back in time. He would go back to the era of the warring clans and kill Madara before he reached the peak of his power. The Uzumaki had calculated the amount of chakra he would need to go back so many years, and if his calculations were correct, then he would have to use all the chakra of the Kyuubi as well as the power he gained from the Jubi. It would burn out Kurama and kill him temporarily, but he would be back in a few years in the current time. That means that Naruto could only go back with his own personal chakra, and that would leave him at a huge power down. In the 2 decades of war, Naruto had grown to be the most powerful man in the lands except for Madara, and his personal skills were definitely in the league of the previous Hokage even without his Biju chakra, so he should be able to defeat a much weaker Uchiha Madara back in time. Remember what I told you before? Don't worry about screwing up that past too much, no matter what, your existence is absolute. Nothing you do will cause you to never be born, said the ancient being with a serious tone. Even though you are sent back in time, you will still have the tiniest traces of me and the Jubi in you, so think of it as you are not a part of the natural process and more as a being that is outside of the world existence. The Naruto that will be born from where you will go will no longer be you. Naruto sighed and nodded. I know, Kurama. You are turning into a nagging father. The Kyuubi chuckled and shook his head. Even after so many years, you still enjoy pissing me off. The commander chuckled back and looked up at the sky. Well, of course. The Biju closed his eyes inside the large garden that was his cage at the moment. Honestly, kid, it has been great knowing you, the heir of the old man that I once knew. Naruto smiled and nodded back. It was truly an honor, Kurama. I know we will probably not see each other ever again, but I promise you that I will not fail this mission, said the blonde man with a hardened expression on his face. I will go back and I will kill Uchiha Madara. Kurama chuckled and nodded back as well. You better, kid. Give him an extra hard kick to the face, okay? The Uzumaki laughed a little. You got it. Naruto walked to the middle of the crater where Konoha once stood and stopped at the very center of the area. Unknown to anyone else in the world, Naruto had set it up an extremely intricate web of seals inside the crater of Konoha, and it spanned even into the forest because of its size. All the hidden seals took Naruto almost 2 decades to finish, and it was his pride and joy as an Uzumaki Fuinjutsu specialist. Naruto could probably be the Uzumaki with the deepest knowledge in Fuinjutsu yet. Even the previous leader of his clan wouldn't have been able to create such a complicated web of seals, or so according to the Kyuubi. The commander suppressed the sadness in his heart about being forever separated from all his friends in his time, but it had to be done. Naruto gripped his fists and flared his chakra to full power, causing the surrounding area to shake from the vast amount of chakra. Naruto had mastered the Kyuubi and the Jubi's chakra as much as he could in the past 2 decades, and now he could use it as if it was his own natural chakra. With the utilization of the mass chakra of the Kyuubi and part of the Jubi, the ground began to shake from the pressure being pushed out of Naruto's body. A familiar cloak of golden chakra flared from Naruto's body as he cried out fiercely into the sky. Ha! Cried the Uzumaki as he chakra created a pillar of light that pierced the heavens themselves. Let's do this, Naruto! Cried the Kyuubi as he himself pushed all of his chakra through the veins of his host. Naruto felt his power hit its maximum level, so he was ready to use his seal. The man placed his 2 hands onto the ground, which was the epicenter of the web of seals. With a simple exhale, Naruto began to force his chakra into the web of seals, and instantly the entire area of the crater and the Hi-no-Kuni forest were covered by a bright light. The mass amount of light was the exhaust of Naruto and his Biju chakra burning through the seals, and soon the light was like a second sun on the ground. Naruto felt as if his body was being ripped apart by the sheer pressure he was exerting, and soon there was an upward force that lifted him into the air. Just a little mo more en Naruto, cried Kurama as his voice was becoming distorted. The Uzumaki forced the last few drops of power through his body as hard as he could, and suddenly his body was propelled up to the sky like meteor. True to his name, Naruto created a maelstrom of blinding light in the sky that cleared the 100-mile radius of any clouds. The earth was shaking from the power being channeled through its domain, and it kept on a huge portion of the earth would be completely destroyed. Then suddenly, there was nothing. Everything was quiet. The forest was still standing and the seeds Naruto planted were still in place. But Naruto was gone. It has been a long time since the last time Naruto was knocked unconscious by something. The last time it happened was at the end of the fight with Madara. But Naruto would never forget the peculiar feeling of waking up with a weird headache that would last for the day. Normally Naruto would lay to rest for a while longer to help him his headache, but seeing that he just used a seal that he took 20 years to make, he was far too anxious to just lay there. Naruto forced himself to open his eyes and the first thing he saw was that the sky was extremely blue, there was not a cloud in sight. Underneath his body were no longer the loose dirt of the crater, but it was a layer of soft and long grass. How long has it been since Naruto last felt the crisp feeling of laying on grass? He couldn't remember, but he knew that it was once his favorite thing to do back in Konoha. Moving his hands just very little, Naruto could feel that he didn't have any strength left. He had used up almost all of his chakra and was very weak. Thankfully Naruto had thought about this situation, so he had brought back with him in his body seals a chakra replenishing seal. The Uzumaki placed several of them on his body a few hours ago and they would automatically activate whenever he would be low on chakra, and he could already feel them kicking in as he felt his reserves fill up gradually. Man, that was a rough ride, muttered Naruto to himself as he forced his body to sit up. The commander looked down and saw that his clothes were mostly intact, but his haori was completely ripped up and could barely stay on his body. Naruto sighed and ripped the remains off his body and brushed the dust that had collected on his Junin uniform, which was surprisingly still perfectly fine. He then checked all the seals he had placed on his body and he found that they were all intact, meaning that all the things he brought back with him were still with him, which was certainly good news. Looking around the area, Naruto couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. It was the Konoha forest, but in this time it was just a nameless forest in the middle of High no Kuni. Naruto smiled softly to himself as he looked down at his hands. Wow, it really worked, I am really back in time, thought the man silently as he felt more hopeful than he had been for the last 20 years. Naruto had thought of a thorough plan of action before he left, and the first step was to locate where the Uzumaki clan was. It had become clear to Naruto that Madara had fostered so much animosity for the world, mainly for the Senju clan, so Naruto would try to prevent that from ever happening. He would join the Uzumaki clan and work as a part of their system. Hopefully that would allow him to meet the Uchiha clan and give him the chance to kill Uchiha Madara, for the world, and his revenge. Naruto stood up with a sigh and smiled a little when he heard the sounds of a creek near him. So thirsty, muttered the man as he staggered over to the small river and knelt down in front of it. The Uzumaki moaned a little in relief and pleasure as he drank the cold and fresh water. Back in his own time, the water of the many rivers in High no Kuni had mostly been contaminated by the war, so it tasted horrible and it often made Naruto sick to his stomach, so the clear water in this time was a real treat to the powerful man. After having his fill of water, Naruto sighed and wiped his lips dry with his hand, but that was also when he looked down at the water. What is this? Muttered the man in shock as he saw his reflection. The person who looked back at Naruto was not who he was when he left. Naruto now looked like when he was 20 years old. The difference was quite clear. He no longer had the wrinkles he collected in his many hours of stress and he wasn't as tanned as he was. This was certainly unexpected. Going back in time should only affect the surroundings around him. His physical body should have no changes to it all. Maybe it was caused by using up all of his Biju chakra at once. Naruto started to chuckle. Well, I can't say I am not happy about this. Suddenly Naruto picked up some rapid footsteps coming towards him from the forest on his right side. Out of habit Naruto immediately unsealed one of his tri-pronged kunai from his wrist and held it tightly in his hand. But what came out of the forest only a few seconds after was not what he expected. He was expecting an ugly Zetsu to jump at him, but instead he was greeted by the sight of a beautiful woman with a shade of red hair that reminded Naruto of his mother. "Look out!" cried the young woman as she fell towards Naruto's direction. Out of reflex Naruto stepped forward and caught the woman in his arms, and she was surprisingly light in his arms. Looking down into his arms Naruto stared into a pair of light purple eyes that looked very innocent and pure. Refocusing his vision Naruto took in the full image of the woman's face, and he had to admit that she was one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen in his life. Her face is quite angelic and she had a sense of majestic on her. "Are you alright, miss?" asked Naruto as he slowly placed the woman on her feet. "You're hurt," exclaimed the man as he saw quite a bit of blood seeping through her white clothes. The woman was quite frantic as she tried to pull Naruto away from the area. "You have to leave this area, there are a lot of people coming this way." Naruto's eyes narrowed when he felt many chakra signatures coming their way and oddly, he could still feel their negative emotions. "What the hell? Kurama, I can't sense Kurama anymore, why do I still have this power?" Shaking his head clear of the thought Naruto focused on the incoming group of people who were most likely after the woman behind him. "What are you doing? They will kill you if you don't run," cried the woman, but her voice fell on deaf ears as Naruto's eyes caught sight of a flag that was emerging from the forest. "Uchiha!" cried Naruto in anger as he flared his powerful chakra, which had been partially revived. As soon as the word left Naruto's lips tens of people leapt out of the treeline with weapons in their hands. They all had one thing that Naruto hated more than anything in his life, the Sharingan. They all had the same red eyes that the man who killed almost everyone close to him had, and that alone was enough to put Naruto into a state of untamed anger. "Kill her!" cried the apparent leader of the Uchiha group as they pointed over at the woman. The woman staggered back and was about to leave Naruto since they were after her anyway, but she stopped when she felt the man flare his aura of chakra. The woman was in shock, she had never felt such a powerful chakra signature before except for Senju Hashirama who she grew up with. Naruto silently threw his tri-pronged kunai up to the area where the Uchihas were jumping down and gripped his fists. "Hiraishin no Jutsu," muttered the man as he vanished from sight and killed the first 5 Uchiha on the spot. The other watched on in shock as their leader and teammates were suddenly killed, and they themselves were frozen in shock from the palpable killer intent that filled the area. Naruto used his momentum to mercilessly kill whoever was in his way, and blood was aimlessly splurting all over the forest. The woman watched on in shock and amazement as Naruto effortlessly cut down one of the Uchiha's battle units. "Futon. Atsugai." Naruto pushed his hands out and instantly, a blast of potent wind ripped apart the lands in front of him. The rest of the Uchihas close to the man were blasted to shreds by the sharp and heavy wind, none of them survived the next second of their lives. The wind carried on to destroy a large part of the forest, and at that point Naruto was struck out of the stupor and felt a little guilt about damaging the land he loved so much. A stabbing pain suddenly struck Naruto's head as he fell to the ground. "Erg." The woman was still in shock from the man's power but she ran up to him and knelt down. "Hey, are you alright?" Naruto was in extremely pain as he felt a great headache but he forced his eyes open. "Who or why you?" strained out the man weakly. The woman had a look of concern on her face as she placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "I am Uzumaki Mito," muttered the woman as she lifted Naruto and supported his weight with her shoulders. "You saved me so I will save you. Don't worry, I'll get you some help." The past 20 years have been rather difficult for the Uzumaki clan. Since their existence, the Uzumakis have been known as some of the most powerful people throughout the elemental nations, but that fact had started to dwindle down into fiction. The names of their close relative, the Senju clan, and their own rivals, the Uchiha clan, have both grown more famous than the Fuinjutsu masters of elemental nations. It was a shame that the latest generation of the Uzumaki clan were not as talented or powerful as their Senju and Uchiha counterparts. The names of Uchiha Madara and Senju Hashirama had become legends in the shinobi world, and were both known as the two most powerful ninja in the lands. Their fame and glory had clouded over the names of the Uzumakis, and that was an embarrassment to the latter. The current leader of the Uzumaki is Uzumaki Genryusai, one of the most respected and revered man in the elemental nations. The aged shinobi had resigned into being advisors to the younger generation just like his Uchiha and Senju counterparts, but he was silently angry at the lack of power his children had. Genryusai originally had 3 children, 2 older boys and 1 girl. The boys were born as twins and Genryusai had high hopes for them. Unfortunately they perished on the battlefield a few years ago. Then there was his little girl, definitely the apple in his eye. Genryusai never wanted to train his daughter to be a kunoichi as he wanted only peace and happiness for his little girl, but since she was the only heir to the clan after her brother's death, Genryusai had no choice but to train her as well. Uzumaki Mito had a lot more talent than her brothers, and she took her father's teachings like a fish in water, but she was still not strong enough. Maybe it was because of the fact that Fuinjutsu weren't really meant to be used in battle, and that was why the Uzumaki were not as demanded for mission when compared to the battle-hardwired Uchiha and Senju. But there is one thing that the Uzumaki have that the other 2 clans don't, it is their longevity and supreme stamina. The bodies of the Uzumaki members were a lot more durable and fitted during battle and training, and that alone put a lot of hope in Genryusai's mind. With the powerful bodies gifted to them, Uzumakis should be some of the most battle-orientated people in the lands, and one day they would surpass even their relative, the Senju clan, and the Uchiha clan. Currently the Uzumaki clan made a home out of a large island just on the edge of Hai no Kuni, a place where they would have natural barriers of water. It was a relatively new sanctuary for the Uzumakis as they have only relocated to the island 10 years ago, but so far it had done them well and people had hoped that their home would last for a long while. At the highest point of the island was a large hill named Tenkei, Heaven's Blessing, the home to the leader of the clan and where the main library was built. It had a panoramic view of the village on the island as well as the ocean, and it was the favorite place of Uzumaki Genryusai. The old man rather enjoyed serving tea with his wife and daughter in the afternoon in their large backyard, and watching the sakura blossoms cascade to the ground during Hanami season. I wonder where Mito-chan is right now, she hasn't sent anything back about her position yet, muttered Genryusai as he sat in his regular chair staring into his private sakura forest. The old man had sent Mito out on a mission a week ago and he was growing worried since she hasn't responded to any sort of contact. It was simple information gathering mission that should have only taken the young woman 3 days to complete, but it has already been a week. The father was getting distressed and wanted to send someone out to find HS daughter and bring her home. I'm sure she is fine, said a kind and gentle voice next to the leader of the clan. Mito-chan is a strong girl, and I know that she will come back soon. Genryusai smiled over at the elderly woman beside him and nodded. Well, she is our daughter after all. The elderly woman was the wife of Genryusai and one of the kindest person one would find in the world. Uzumaki Retsu was a medical kunoichi back when she was young, and she was one of the foremost experts in extracting poison from the body. The woman had saved thousands of lives in her lifetime, including her husband's 40 years ago, and she was one of the most respected kunoichi in the world. Retsu smiled back at her husband and reached out to hold his hand. So have you come to a decision about Mito-chan's marriage into the Senju clan? Genryusai sighed and tightened his grip around his wife's hand. I still don't want to let her go. Mito-chan is strong and I know she would be able to lead our people, said the man with conviction in his voice. I don't want to just send her off to the Senju clan just so our clans can be closer. The old lady smiled and nodded. And you don't want to let her darling daughter go, right? The leader smiled softly and looked over at his wife. You really know me better than anyone. Retsu laughed lightly and leaned into her soul mate. I feel the same way too. Mito-chan is our daughter, not some bargaining chip, said the old lady with pride in her eyes. If the Senju clan really respects our blood ties, then they would be close to us without the need of a political marriage. Genryusai nodded. I agree, muttered the man before he sighed. But how does Mito-chan feel about this? She grew up with Hashirama, does she want to marry him? Retsu sighed also and shook her head. No, said the woman with a smile. Mito-chan grew up with Hashirama-kun like siblings, she thinks of him like an older brother, nothing more. Genryusai nodded in understanding. It is no mystery to most people that Hashirama-kun had liked Mito-chan for a while now, but it is only one-sided. Mito-chan has no romantic feelings for him. Genryusai sighed as he sipped from his cup of tea. Then it is decided. I will turn down the marriage proposal, announced the leader with a small smile on his face. Our daughter will marry for herself, not for the clan. Retsu smiled and nodded. Yes. Where am I? Thought Naruto silently as he slowly regained his consciousness. The man felt terrible, his body was sore, his head was still aching, and his throat felt extremely dry. Naruto could still remember what happened before very clearly, but he still couldn't figure out why he was suddenly struck with a horribly painful headache. Nothing of the sort had ever happened to Naruto before. It was as if an extremely sharp needle had pierced his brain and was twisting and turning inside his head. It may have been the most painful experience of his life. The headache still affecting Naruto a little and he didn't want to open his eyes yet, so he used his nose to detect what was around him. Even after being separated from the Kyuubi, Naruto seemed to have kept a small bit of his power. He could still use his strong sense of smell and sense negative emotions if his fight with the Uchiha indicated anything. Whiffing his nose around a little, Naruto figured out that he was still in a forest. He would never forget the smell of the trees and earth, but there was something in the air that he just couldn't place. It was an aroma that reminded him of sakura blossoms with a hint of roses. Naruto had no idea what it was. Man, I am so thirsty. Naruto grunted as he moved his arm and tried to push himself into a sitting position. The man struggled for a little while, but he sat up fully and started to rub his eyes. Slowly the man parted his eyelids and tried to see where he was. Naruto ignored the slight sting in his eyes and waited for them to be focused after taking in the light. Oh, you're awake, said a rather relieved voice just a few feet away from Naruto, and the man looked over to see the same woman he came across back then. It connected to the man that the wonderful smell early was from this woman, and she was the one who took care of him when he fell unconscious from his sudden headache. But then something dawned on Naruto. The woman told him her name just before he passed out. Uzumaki Mito. The first time Naruto had heard of Uzumaki Mito was in one of his early days in the academy. Uruka sensei was teaching the class about the history of the village and the previous Hokage. It was then that Naruto learned that the wife of the Shodai was Uzumaki Mito. It was strange that he didn't pick up they had the same last name back then. Then Naruto's mother had told him that she had met with Mito when she first arrived in Konoha. The elderly Uzumaki at the time was like a mother figure to Kushina. Naruto looked back up at the young and beautiful woman in front of him and couldn't help but feel surreal. In his mind, Uzumaki Mito had always been an old lady with gray hair, but the real Mito in front of him was glowing with life and had vibrant red hair that Naruto adored. Mito smiled and knelt down in front of Naruto. Are you alright? That was quite an experience you had. Naruto was broken out of his stupor and managed a small nod. Yes, I am fine. Thank you so much for taking care of me, said the man with a smile. The young woman just waved him off with her smile still directed at him. No problem at all, it is the least I can do after you saved me from those Uchiha, said Mito with a grin on her face. And I can't just leave another Uzumaki behind, can I? The blonde man was surprised and looked up at the woman. How did you know I am an Uzumaki? Mito smirked. I may not be one of the best chakra sensors out there, but I am good enough to tell that you have chakra that belongs to the Uzumaki clan, claimed the girl with pride in her voice. So did Tu-chan send you here to back me up? Naruto was seeing where the conversation was going and shook his head. No, I was actually on a trip to find the Uzumaki clan, said the man as the girl was in turn surprised. I am an Uzumaki, but I have been living with my parents this whole time and I have never actually seen our home. This was a cover-up that Naruto had thought up before he traveled back in time. He had done some research and found that some Uzumaki had broken off contact with the clan to live as normal civilians, so it would be the perfect cover-up for him. The girl was surprised and sat down on the ground. Really? Muttered Mito as she tilted her head in thought. I know about some members that have broken off contact with the clan, but I've actually never met one before. The man was delighted at how pleasant and carefree Mito was being. Well, I am one of them. Mito nodded and smiled. So where are your parents now? Are they thinking of coming back to the clan? Naruto's expression darkened and shook his head. My parents are dead. They were both killed by the Uchiha clan, muttered the man angrily as Mito's eyes widened. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring that up. Apologized Mito with her eyes to the side. Naruto shook his head of his negative emotions and smiled at Mito. It's alright Mito-san, I should be sorry for being angry, said the man as the girl looked back at him. It is still kind of a sore subject for me. Mito shook her head. No, I completely understand. The two Uzumakis shared a moment of silence as neither of them knew what to say after all that. Mito was twiddling around with a blade of grass as she looked down at the ground, trying to come out with a new topic to talk about. Naruto on the other hand was taking the time to really look at the woman in front of him. Mito was really a beautiful girl in his eyes, her face was adorable and angelic. Her red-haired casseted down to the small of her back and looked very silky to touch. Then there was the elegant white kimono on her, it made her look perfect. Naruto's eyes suddenly widened. Mito-san, are your own wounds treated? Asked the man remembering her wound as he saw the blood on her kimono. Mito smiled and nodded. Yes, I am a novice medical kunoichi and I healed myself. The male Uzumaki nodded and looked around the forest. Then we should leave this forest soon. The Uzumaki heiress sighed. That is the problem, this forest is close to the main base of the Uchiha clan, and if we get caught by them we are done for. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. This is where the Uchiha's base is. So Uchiha Madara should be somewhere here. Thought the man as an involuntary surge of survival instincts ran through his body. Being so close to the Uchiha made Naruto feel on the edge. After spending 20 years trying to survive the onslaught of Madara, Naruto had grown a little wary of being close to the man. Madara was truly powerful back in his time, being the Jinchuriki of the Jubi granted him godly powers and Naruto shivered at the thought of the power of the Rakudo Sennin. The Uzumaki could very go and kill the younger Madara right then, but he held himself back. Without Kurama and his portion of the Jubi's chakra, Naruto was significantly weakened compared to his real self, and he did not know enough of his own power yet to take on Uchiha Madara. So the Uchiha are out looking for you? Asked Naruto at the young woman. Mito nodded seriously. Yes, I was sent on a mission to gather some intelligence from the Uchiha, and it seems that they discovered me on the job, explained the girl with a little stress. It seems that they know of my true identity as the heiress of the Uzumaki clan, and they wanted to either capture me or kill me. Naruto nodded. It is safe to assume that, with our clan being so close with the Senju clan, it is only natural that the Uchiha would want to use our heiress as leverage against the Senju, grunted out the man with a bit on anger in his voice. Those damn Uchihas will do anything to get their way. The Uzumaki heiress nodded solemnly before she looked back at the man. So are you feeling rested enough to travel now? We need to find a way out of here. The blond man nodded and stood up. I'm ready to go, replied the man as he started to stretch his tendons and muscles. Mito nodded with a smile. Great, let's go. As Naruto ran alongside Mito inside the forest, he couldn't help but feel nostalgic seeing the giant trees around him. It reminded him of the Forest of Death and the Chunin exams. It was surreal to think that it has already been over 20 years since then. Naruto no longer held any friendship for Sasuke, but he still treasured his memories with Sakura and the rest of Rookie 9. Over the years, all of Naruto's childhood friends perished in the war, none of them survived. Naruto sighed inwardly at the thought of his friends. After his mission in the past, it was likely that all of them wouldn't even be born. I think we are going in the right direction, said Mito, breaking Naruto out of his thoughts. It is about sundown and we need to head west, so all we need is to follow the sun. Naruto nodded in agreement. Yes, muttered the man. So the Uzumaki clan is located in the south of here. Mito nodded and looked back with a smile. That's right. I forgot you had never been home before, said the girl with a bright smile. We have relocated to an island of the coast of Hai no Kuni. We moved there 10 years ago and it has been great. Naruto smiled at the thought of going to the home of his ancestors. It sounds great. I look forward to seeing it for the first time. The two Uzumakis continued to travel in silence through the forest, and they were almost at the edge of the place. So far there were no signs of movement around them and everything was going very smoothly, but Naruto was growing dubious. The way out of the forest was a walk out of the park. It was too easy. The man closed his eyes and stretched out his senses to chart out a mental map of his surroundings. True to his suspicion, Naruto sensed a few signatures of negative emotions trailing behind them. They were about 100 feet back and they were deliberately trying to be discreet. Naruto narrowed his eyes and acted like nothing happened before looking across a little at Mito. Mito-san, is the location of the Uzumaki clan a secret? Asked Naruto softly. Mito was a little surprised at the question and just nodded. Apart from us Uzumakis and the Senju clan, no one really knows of our location. Naruto nodded and inwardly sighed at the trusting Mito. The girl was still young and inexperienced, that much was very obvious. He could have been a converted Uzumaki who was spying on them for other clans. Mito was far too trusting and that was definitely not a good sign for the girl. But back to Naruto's main issue, it was safe to assume that the Uchiha were purposely letting them escape in order to shadow them. They wanted to know where the Uzumaki clan were located. Okay Mito-san, don't act any differently, muttered Naruto as he continued to run forward with his clan heiress. There are about 10 Uchihas following us 100 feet back. Mito's eyes widened but managed to hold back any sudden movements. They are purposely letting us go in order to follow behind us. They want to find out where our clan is located. Mito was angry that she did not notice and discreetly grunted in acknowledgement. Okay, so we should confront them now. Naruto shook his head very little. No. While that may end their pursuit, it may also attract the attention of other Uchihas near them. We have to get rid of them as quickly and silently as we can. The heiress nodded in agreement. All right, but I am not so much of a fighter myself, said the girl a little shamefully. I am more of a medic and stealth kunoichi. The blonde man smiled kindly at the girl. Well, this is where I come in. Don't worry Mito-san, just leave everything to me. Naruto knew exactly how quickly himself and Mito were moving, and the Uchiha were doing their best to stay at a uniform length away from them, so it was safe to reason that the Uchiha were traveling at the same speed. There was about 100 feet distance between the Uzumaki and their pursuers, and based on their speed it would take them about 10 seconds to clear 100 feet. Naruto smiled to himself as he channeled some more chakra to his feet, and readied his Hiraishin Jutsu Shiki. Over the years Naruto had gained complete control over his father's Hiraishin no Jutsu, and he could even plant the jutsu shiki through the sole of his feet. So for the next 10 seconds, Naruto planted 5 jutsu shikis on the 5 branches he stepped on, and right at the end of those 10 seconds, Naruto struck. Mito was shocked to see Naruto suddenly disappear. He was so fast she couldn't see his movements at all. The girl stopped in her tracks and looked backwards at the sight. It was safe to say that she was stunned. It was the same jutsu Naruto had used before to defeat most of the Uchiha, but Mito hadn't seen its true effectiveness. As soon as Mito turned back, she saw the sight of Naruto slicing open all 10 of the Uchiha's jugulars, in under a split second. The Uchihas had no chance to even fight back, they didn't even know what hit them. In less than a second they were all cut down like sheep to the slaughter, and all they would have seen was a flash of Naruto's blonde hair. Incredible, muttered Mito in awe at her fellow Uzumaki's power. Naruto was standing over the fallen corpses of the Uchiha with a blank look on his face as he gripped his fists together. That brief use of the Hiraishin no Jutsu allowed Naruto to judge the amount of power he had left. Using the Hiraishin didn't use up any sort of chakra when he was just teleporting himself, but it would show him the capacity of his body and the size of his chakra reserves. So far Naruto concluded that he was left with the chakra of an average kage. It was still plenty to work with, but not nearly as much as what he had back in his time. I need to work on developing a larger reserve. I would need it later on if I am to fight Uchiha Madara. Naruto still had to try out his other jutsu, most importantly his Rasengan and the Kage Bunshin. Naruto was sure that the Rasengan would be no problem at all, seeing that his chakra control should have improved at the loss of part of his chakra, but his Kage Bunshin would probably be halved in number. Having gained so much experience and skills as a shinobi, Naruto would rarely produce mass amount of clones to fight anymore, but he would still use them for training. Losing the ability to use mass amounts of clones would slow his progress down quite a bit. With a sigh, Naruto jumped back to his future leader and offered her a smile. There, let's get going now. Mito was still looking at the man in awe and just nodded a little. That was amazing, exclaimed the girl with glee. I've never seen anyone move so fast before. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at the girl's innocence and happiness. It made him feel nice inside. Thank you, Mito-san. Hopefully my skills will allow me back into the clan. The heiress nodded enthusiastically. I am sure that my two-chan would be delighted to have someone like you in our clan. Chirped the girl happily as she hopped a little. Let's hurry back, I have to introduce you to my two-chan. Naruto had a smile on his face as he sped across a part of the expansive ocean alongside Uzumaki Mito. The young woman was correct. The location of the Uzumaki clan was just off the coast of Hine no Kuni. Naruto could already sense from chakra signatures from where he was. Naruto was happy about going to his official clan home for the first time ever. These people were literally his family, one that he desperately needed when he was a child. The Uzumaki had always wondered about his family when he was an orphan back in Konoha, and he never thought that he would one day actually join the original Uzumaki clan. The Masters of Fuinjutsu had been destroyed along with their village in the Second Shinobi World War, and Naruto had always been a little angry about it, but now he had a chance to change things. Naruto plans to make the Uzumaki clan the strongest in the elemental nations, a clan that will be more revered and praised than the Uchiha and Senju. The restoration of the Uzumaki clan had been a side goal in Naruto's mind even back in his own time. He wanted to repopulate his lost clan by himself after the war, but there was an easier way. By bringing the Uzumaki clan up to the top of the elemental nations would allow Naruto to go to war with the Uchiha clan, and he would use that to destroy Uchiha Madara before he could ever become so powerful. This would bring a great change to the future, and Naruto knew that perfectly, but it was a needed change. It was clear that the formation of the shinobi villages was a great idea that helped the world a great deal, but Naruto will tweak it a little. Naruto will wipe out the Uchiha clan before the establishment of any village, and that will bring a complete end to the cycle of hatred. We are almost there, Naruto-san, chirped Mito happily as she was very excited to finally return home. Naruto nodded back with a smile on his face. Yes, I can sense some people already. Mito looked over at Naruto and winked. When we get back, I will introduce you to Tu-chan, said the girl as Naruto nodded in acknowledgement. I know you are an Uzumaki and you belong here with us, but you still have to be passed by the leader first. That is very understandable, replied Naruto calmly. I look forward to meeting the leader of our clan. Mito giggled and looked back ahead. Tu-chan might be a lot different than what you imagine. That tends to be the general result of everyone meeting Tu-chan for the first time. Naruto didn't know what Mito was referring to but nodded either way. Inside his head Naruto was thinking that the leader of his clan would be something like the Sandaime Hokage, an old man with a lifetime of experience to offer his young children. Of course Naruto had heard many things about the Uzumaki leader, Uzumaki Genryusai. Back in his own time Naruto had researched extensively about the past and its people, and the one he paid the most attention to was his ancestor Uzumaki Genryusai. Not much were known about the old Uzumaki leader, but the books did describe him as his great leader who had the love and admiration of his people. Naruto held respect for the man just because of that face. His ancestor was a man who cared for his home and family, and that was all Naruto looked for in a leader. In Naruto's eyes, the leader's most important trait is to motivate and encourage his people. As long as he is able to do that, strength may not necessarily be needed. Soon the two Uzumakis made it to the main gate of the Uzumaki clan compound, and Naruto was surprised at the enormous size of the structure. Naruto could tell that it was not a regular gate. It had many layers of seals encrited on its surface, and from what he deduced Naruto found that if one was to try to break the gate with force, the gate would automatically absorb the chakra used by the trespasser and use it to enforce its own defenses. It was truly an impressive gate guarding the home of all Uzumakis. Mito had a smile on her face as she walked up to the gate and placed her hand on some sort of talisman. I'm home, whispered the young woman as she channeled some chakra through the talisman and the giant bolts and gears of the gate started to shift. Naruto stood behind Mito with a serious expression on his face as he readied himself for meeting with his clan. Mito-chan, shrieked a girl who was no older than Mito as she ran out of the gate as soon as it was opened. Mito smiled brightly at the sight of the other girl and ran towards her with her arms opened. Asuka-chan, cried Mito as she hugged her best friend as hard as she could. Asuka was a girl who had the same shade of hair as Mito. The traditional Uzumaki red. She tied her hair into a braided ponytail that reached the top of her back. Naruto mused at the fact that Asuka was dressed like a young cowgirl. She had a peach-colored vest over a pink shirt with blue jeans, and to top it off she had a white cowboy hat on her head. It was certainly not normal for people to dress so conspicuously as a ninja, but it look worked on the girl and Naruto thought she was quite cute. Mito Obakan, cried another voice as a small boy no older than the age of 10 ran out of the gate. You're home. Mito pulled away from Asuka and desperately reached to wrap the boy in her arms. Ren-chan, cried Mito as a few drops of tears escaped her eyes. Naruto smiled a little at the sight. It seems that Mito has been desperately missed during her mission. While he looked at the young boy Naruto couldn't help but feel a little nostalgic. The boy's face reminded him a little of Konohamaru. The boy was clearly younger than Naruto's surrogate brother, but their facial structures were a little similar. The Uzumaki boy had a shade of red hair that was like Mito's, but his was a little darker and was spiky as well. Asuka wiped the tears from her eyes. What took you so long, Mito-chan? We were all so worried. Asked the girl as a crowd began to emerge from behind the gate. Most of them were just the civilians of the clan, and they were happy that their future leader made it home safe. Mito looked up at her friend as she cradled the boy's head against her chest. I had some problems during my mission so I was late, said the girl a little sheepishly. I'm sorry for worrying you all. Naruto had widened eyes as he gazed upon the growing crowd of people behind the gate. They almost all had red hair. Naruto felt surreal thinking that everyone in front of him were Uzumakis, a clan of people who had all perished during his own time. Naruto had only seen a few Uzumakis in his life, but most of them except his mother were kind of weird the moment he met them. He had never just met a normal Uzumaki before. Looking into the crowd with his sentimental eyes, Naruto felt happy. These were his people, his family. These people shared the same blood as him, they were related. The happy and carefree faces of the Uzumakis made Naruto think of his days back in Konoha when it was still peaceful. Their smiles were very similar. "You're home," said an emotional voice that sliced through all other chatter. "Mito-chan." Mito looked over, with tears in her eyes, at the origin of the voice, and she saw her parents standing there with relieved smile of their own. "Tu-chan, Ka-chan," cried the heiress to the clan as she ran forward and leapt into the comfort of her parents' arms like a little girl. Genryusai and Retsu happily accepted their daughter into their arms and hugged her lovingly. "I knew you would make it home," muttered the leader of the clan with a smile on his face. "I was so very worried, but I knew you would come back to us." Retsu smiled as her daughter nodded into their arms. "Yes. Welcome home, Mito-chan." Naruto smiled at the sight with happiness with a hint of amusement. The Uzumaki clan was certainly very different from the Uchiha clan. It was amazing that the heiress of the clan could still be such a little girl in front of so many people in public. No to mention that the leaders of the village looked more like an old retired couple who would rather play with grandchildren than to lead their clan into greatness. While it may seem absurd and ridiculous to other clans, Naruto would his clan's affectionate nature to each other to be wonderful and warm. After all, a clan or village should be a huge family that cares for each other. A strong bond between members of the clan would benefit its power more than any sort of training could bring. Genryusai's eyes finally landed on Naruto. The old man had noticed the young man standing before him a few minutes ago, but he decided to enjoy his reunion with his daughter before he talked to the mysterious young man. "And who might this young man be?" asked Genryusai as he led everyone's attention to the blonde man. Naruto was surprised at the sudden attention to him and was immediately broken out of his stupor. "Hello, sir," said the young man politely with a smile on his face. Mito pulled back from her embrace with her parents and smiled. "This is Uzumaki Naruto, he was the one who saved me on the mission." People in the area were all surprised that the blonde man was an Uzumaki, and more shocked that he saved their heiress on her mission. Asuka and Ren both looked at Naruto with appreciation and smiled at him kindly for saving their precious best friend and aunt. Retsu smiled when she sensed the man's chakra and found that he was in face an Uzumaki. Only their own clan members would have such peculiar chakra. Genryusai walked closer to Naruto with his thin eyes locked into the young man's own azure orbs. "Uzumaki. Naruto." Naruto nodded with a blank look on his face. "Hi." The leader of the Uzumakis nodded before he cracked a smile. "Well, please come in and let me treat you to a cup of tea, we have a lot to discuss." The blonde Uzumaki nodded his head. "Of course, sir." For the first time in his life, Naruto set foot into a place where it belonged solely to his family and nobody else. While it may not have been as glorious and prosperous as Konoha was back in his own time, it was near perfection in his eyes. This was what he yearned to see. Children in the streets walking along with their parents happily while eating some treat. The general mood of the village was happy and festive, something Naruto had not seen for over 20 years. Very much like Konoha, there were many stands and stores open for daily customers of the village, and they have Naruto a huge sense of nostalgia. He could smell the delightful aroma of steamed buns and grilled squid in the air, the soft sound the wind through trees around him, and the peculiar scent of the ocean seeping from the outskirts of the village. The place was disturbingly like Konoha, and Naruto felt a lump in his throat as he walked through the busy and happy street with his ancestors. Just seeing these people gave Naruto hope and encouragement that he could really change the future. He needed to change the future. Naruto will never allow Uchiha Madara to construct his evil plot again. he would die before he would allow the Uchiha's plan to come to fruition. It was the smiles and laughter of people that he needed to protect. Even after so many years of war and violence, Naruto believed that true peace is ever possible and he will achieve it. Mito, who was walking next to her mother, looked on at Naruto with wonder. She had just met the man less than a day ago and he had already made a huge impact in her life. Without Naruto saving her from the forest, Mito shuddered at the thought of being captured by the Uchiha. The man had saved her life and she would make sure that he would have a place in his home. Retsu looked over at her daughter before she wrapped an arm around her shoulder. Are you alright, Mito-chan? Mito nodded and smiled over at her mother. Yes, Ka-chan, I am just tired. Retsu nodded while knowing that there was something else bothering her daughter. The matriarch sighed inwardly as she continued to walk towards the main office of her husband's. As a kunoichi of over 30 years, Retsu could read people very well, and she saw that the young man walking in front of her was hiding something. Retsu was quite sure that the man had no hostile intent towards them, but that did not stop her from being a little dubious about his character. Genryusai looked ahead and saw that they were nearly at his office. We are here, Naruto-san. Naruto looked over at the man, momentarily out of his good time of looking around the village, and nodded. Hi, said the young man with more happiness than he had before, which the old man had noticed. The leader of the Uzumakis smiled at the young man. Are you having a good time just looking around? The blonde nodded with a happy smile on his face. Yes, it really has been a while since I have been in such a happy place, said Naruto with a sense of somber undertone that Genryusai found familiar. It is refreshing to see that some places still have peace in times of turmoil. Genryusai found that the emotions in Naruto's eyes were really, and he was slight more at peace. We try very hard to keep our peaceful lifestyle afloat, but that is becoming more and more difficult in these times. The group of Uzumakis walked into a large building with traditional Japanese design. It was the size of the Hokage building back in Konoha, but this was much less like a military headquarters, it was more like a normal large mansion for some rich folk. Naruto was delighted by the excess amount of sakura trees that decorated the perimeter of the large building in a parallel pattern. He had always loved the sight and smell of sakura trees, they made him feel at peace. Naruto followed his future leader strictly as they passed by some guards who were guarding the building with some serious facade on their face, which made Naruto feel a little familiar seeing that he had grown used to being in a militaristic environment. The group of Uzumakis trekked up some impressive wooden stairs with its own guards, and after another minute of traveling they finally made it to the main office of the Uzumaki leader. It was a grand office in Naruto's opinion. It had a large double door that had intricate designs of various whirlpools on them, and when opened it revealed a room that was chiseled out of marble, literally. The floor was completely forged out of marble with black and white patterns, while the walls were made out of several large stones of iron covered with black marble plating. The shelves on the sides of the room also held impressive collections of antiques and art pieces. Overall the room was fitting for a man like Uzumaki Genryusai. Naruto stood in front of Genryusai's desk as the leader claimed his usual seat. I must thank you for saving my daughter, Naruto-san. The blonde man smiled and shook his head lightly. It was the right thing to do, Genryusai-sama, replied Naruto humbly. I would never let a group of shinobi all target one woman. Mito, who was standing beside her father's seat, had a smile on her face. She was still very grateful that Naruto had gone out of his way to save her. Retsu was also glad that the man had saved her daughter, but she needed to know if he had any sort of ulterior motive. The matriarch of the Uzumaki clan moved next to her daughter and husband, getting a full view of the interview. The old man leaned forward and rested his arms on his desk. Please don't think of me as rude, but before you saved my daughter, did you know who she was? Mito was shocked at the blatant question of Naruto's motive. "2-chan," exclaimed the girl with a bit of anger. It's all right, interrupted Naruto before the girl could say any more. I don't take any offense to that. Mito grunted and crossed her arms together. She was still not happy about how cynical her father was being. But to answer your question, Genryusai-sana, no. I did not know who Mito-sama was before I rescued her. Genryusai nodded, apparently satisfied. So, what were you doing in that area of Hai no Kuni in the first place? That area belongs to the Uchiha clan. Naruto's eyes clouded a little at the mention of the Uchiha, but composed himself immediately. I was actually looking for the Uzumaki clan. I've been looking for this place for quite some time now, said the blonde as Genryusai and Retsu remained emotionless. I have been searching all over Hai no Kuni and was just passing by that forest when I ran into Mito-sama. Honestly, I didn't even know that I was in Uchiha territory. Retsu finally spoke up. I can sense that you are indeed in Uzumaki, said the woman as her husband nodded along. Can you please tell me where you were for the majority of your life? It seems that you are not entirely from the Uzumaki clan. Mito looked over at Naruto and paid close attention as he spoke. My father was not an Uzumaki, but my mother was, and I inherited my Uzumaki chakra from her, explained the man politely to both his leader and his leader's wife. I have always lived in the outskirts of Mizu no Kuni with my parents, until they were killed by several Uchihas a few years ago. Everyone noticed that hate in Naruto's eyes when he mentioned the Uchiha clan. Genryusai nodded. I am sorry for your parents. No matter what, they are a part of our clan. Naruto nodded before he continued his tale. I didn't know about our clan when I was younger. My parents had always kept it a secret from me, said the young man as he looked down a little. I only found out after their death in their will. They told me to return to the clan so I would have a home again. Mito was sympathized her new friend and wanted him to join the Uzumaki's big family. After that I began to train harder on my skills while I looked for the clan, and that brings me here. Retsu nodded her head, satisfied for the moment. Many of our clan members had departed the clan several decades ago. It was after a great war and some of us really wanted to leave to become normal civilians, said the lady with a rather sad voice. Your mother was undoubtedly one of them. It is unfortunate that even after leaving she was still killed by the Uchiha. Genryusai sighed and felt a little tired already. So your mother was the one who taught you ninjutsu? Naruto nodded his head. Yes, but my father was also a shinobi and he taught me as well, and I gained the power I have no way after their deaths. So you trained yourself for the past few years, suggested Genryusai with a tiny hint of praise. I assume that your training has worked, seeing that you were able to save my daughter. Mito smiled and nodded rather enthusiastically. Yeah, I have never seen anyone as fast as Naruto-san before, not even Hashirama or Tobirama are as fast as him. Exclaimed the girl as her parents were shocked at the news. He defeated all 10 Uchihas chasing me in under a second. I never thought anyone could be so fast. Retsu looked over at Naruto. So are you a taijutsu-focused ninja, Naruto-san? Naruto shook his head negatively. No, I am a fuinjutsu user. What Mito-san saw me do early was a result of fuinjutsu. Genryusai as surprised and pressed on the topic. Really? Asked the old man as his daughter nodded along. Naruto nodded and looked into his leader's eyes. Yes, I use a jutsu my parents created, Hiraishin no Jutsu, said the young man, ignoring the looks on the other for the moment. I know that the Senju clan has a similar jutsu, but I assure you that mine is different. Naruto had seen the Nadaime use his form of Hiraishin before, but it was nowhere as fast or versatile as his father's version. Even the Nidami admitted that the Yondaime was much faster than he was. Mito had widened eyes. I have seen Tobirama use something with that name before, but it was nowhere as fast as what you used. Naruto nodded. My Hiraishin no Jutsu is not pure speed, it is a space-time ninjutsu, said the young man as his audience was once again shocked. By placing a certain jutsu shiki in one place, I open a hole in our dimension and travel to that same place instantaneously. Naruto looked over at Mito. That is what I did before. I placed my marker on the branches we stepped on, and when the Uchihas were on the same branch I teleported to my markers to catch them by surprise. Genryusai and Retsu were both surprised by the power the young man had. That is really quite an impressive jutsu, Naruto-san, said the leader with a small smile on his face. You will definitely make a name for yourself in the future with such power in your possession. Naruto bowed a little at the compliment. Thank you, Genryusai-sama. Retsu stepped forward a little. That being said, Naruto-san, even with all your power and potential, you still want to join the clan? Asked the lady seriously. You can easily make yourself a good name out there without the clan, and that would probably allow you more gain as well. Why would you want to join us? Naruto smiled. For one reason, I am just fulfilling what my parents wanted of me. They wanted me to join back into the clan and I want to follow their advice, said the young man with a look of reminence on his face. Mito stepped forward as well. Is there anything else? Naruto nodded. Secondly, I am quite a family-orientated guy, and I want to be with my family, said the young man sincerely and attracted the smiles of the other in the room. The few years of traveling alone really showed me that I need a home. I want to have a place to return to after a long day. The other noticed the rather solemn look on Naruto's face at the moment. I want to belong to someplace. Mito couldn't stand it anymore. She walked up to Naruto and placed her hands on his shoulders. Well, you stay right here with us, exclaimed the girl with conviction that surprised everyone in the room. You are an Uzumaki and you belong here with your family. Naruto was genuinely touched by the girl's words. The whole backstory was a plot Naruto and Kurama had come up with back in their own time. They needed a background for Naruto to have back in time, so they conjured up a tweaked version of Minato and Kushina's story. Even though the story was not exactly true, Naruto's feelings and emotions were real, and seeing Mito so willing to accept him into the clan really made him happy. Is that really okay? Asked Naruto as he looked at Genryusai. The old man stood and walked over to his wife. Despite everything, you are still an Uzumaki and you belong here at home, said the man with a smile on his face. I gladly accept you back into our clan, and you better work harder than the others, you are several years late, joked the man with a small laugh. Retsu also nodded and smiled. You may not have grown up with us here, but this is still your family home and you should be here with us. Naruto actually felt relief and happiness as he was accepted with opened arms. Thank you, said the young man with the most genuine tone he could muster. Mito giggled happily and wrapped her arms around Naruto's right arm. Welcome home, Naruto-san. Naruto had to suppress a tear of joy from escaping his eye. Thank you so much. For the majority of his life, all Naruto ever wanted was a family, and he had never had one. All the suppressed feelings bubbled up to the surface of Naruto's mind, and even a hardened war general like himself had to hold back the sheer happiness he felt. He was finally truly with his family. He had joined the Uzumaki clan, a place that he was born to be in. I promise, I will never let the Uzumaki clan be destroyed, silently thought the man with a smile on his face. This is my home, and I will protect it with my life. It has been many years since Naruto had been so in peace. When the Uzumaki was back in his own time, he was used to living in constant change. Their forces would be in one place in the morning and another by nightfall, and that made Naruto yearn for a stable home. It was depressing to say the least that Naruto had to travel back in time to the era of warring states to find peace in his own life. After speaking with the higher-ups of the Uzumaki clan, Mito had led Naruto over to a home that was at the heart of the village. It belonged to the Uzumaki clan and Genryusai would rent these homes out to his shinobi to live in. All Naruto had to do for rent was to pay a feeble 2,000 ryo a month, which was basically the pay of a simple B-ranked mission. Naruto was very happy to live in a home again rather than a camp. He may not look like it, but Naruto enjoyed decorating his own home and making it into his own image. He loved that he finally had a place that he could call his own and he could alter it much as he wanted without having to move every few hours. Back in his own time, and before his untimely death, Kakashi would often tease Naruto for buying different items whenever they would pass through a town. "How are you liking this place?" asked Mito with a smile on her face. Naruto turned his sight back to the beautiful woman and nodded with a smile. "I love it. Thank you again, Mito-sama." The red-haired lady placed her hands on her hips and have Naruto a look. "Just call me Mito, I was never one for formalities." The blonde chuckled and nodded back. "Okay. Then please just call me Naruto." Naruto smiled as he looked around his house. It was of average size, about 1,000 square feet, and it was very efficient. It had 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, 1 full bathroom, and a nice little balcony that had a perfect view of the village. It was much nicer than the run-down little apartment Naruto had back in Konoha, and was heaven compared to his tent during the war. The house was still a bit too empty for Naruto's tastes, and he wanted to buy some paintings or decorations to fill the house up. Mito smirked and leaned against a wall. "Are you planning to buy something for your house?" Naruto smirked back and nodded. "You read my mind, Mito. Do you know any good stores?" The Uzumaki heiress nodded. "Follow me, Naruto. I'll show you around town." Mito led her new friend through the busy streets of the Uzumaki village, and they attracted quite a bit of attention around them. It has been less than a day since Naruto had arrived in the village, and the news of him saving the heiress had been floating around town quite quickly. It was unusual for the people to know that a wayward Uzumaki young man had saved the heiress out of chance. In a way they thought that Naruto and Mito were destined to meet somehow. Naruto was not bothered at all by the people around him staring at him blatantly. He had grown used to it when he was the supreme commander of his allied forces. Instead, Naruto focused most of his attention at the lively and happy atmosphere of the village. It made him really happy to see other beings so at peace. People were joking and laughing the streets, and strangers had great courtesy for one another. The cynical population Naruto and grown used to was gone, or hadn't been born yet. For the next hour Mito showed Naruto the main stores of the village, not only the furniture stores, but also the supermarkets and general stores. Naruto, by the end of the hour, had bought enough to fill his house up quite a bit. Luckily for Naruto, he had brought back quite a bit of money from his time. Naruto sealed everything he bought into a simple scroll that he sealed into his wrist. It really was very convenient. Mito had her hands entwined behind her back and a smile on her face. "So how are you liking the village so far?" chirped the girl happily. Naruto smiled at Mito's innocence and nodded. "I love it already. It's great to know that I have a home again." The heiress smiled brightly. "That's great!" exclaimed the girl gladly. "I'm sure you will like it more and more." It was still a surprise to Naruto that the legendary Uzumaki Mito, one of the strongest kunoichi to ever live, would be such a childish girl at the moment. Mito greatly reminded Naruto of himself when he was younger, a young and eager person who wanted to become a strong ninja. Naruto was glad that Mito was still her innocent self. He knew better than anyone that when one officially becomes a shinobi, they would never be the same ever again. Naruto was still who he was in his youth by a margin. He knew that he would no longer be as naive or as brash, but he was still Uzumaki Naruto. But becoming more cynical and dubious were facts that Naruto cannot deny. The mature Naruto would always check his back. He would always question every stranger. He would never allow a defect to join his army, and he would never leave any loose ends. The life of a shinobi had turned out to be nothing like what Naruto thought it was when he was a kid. It was much more realistic and harsh, and that was absolute. "Mito-chan!" cried a happy Asuka as she ran over to her best friend. Mito smiled over at the red-haired cowgirl. "Hey Asuka-chan." Asuka stopped in front of Naruto and Mito with a bright smile on her face. "I finally found you. I had been looking for you for half an hour already." The heiress looked a little sheepish. "Sorry, but I was helping Naruto get somethings for his home." Naruto nodded and smiled at Asuka. Yes. Asuka placed a hand on her hips and smirked at Naruto. So you really are an Uzumaki. I was wondering if Genryusai-sama would allow you to stay. Naruto smiled and nodded. Yes, Genryusai-sama was most kind and understanding. From now on I am official a part of the Uzumaki clan, said the man as Mito nodded at his words. Asuka nodded and offered her hand to Naruto. Well, welcome aboard Naruto-san, I am Uzumaki Asuka, nice to meet you. The lone blonde Uzumaki graciously gripped Asuka's hand and smiled. Nice to meet you as well, Asuka-san, I hope to work with you sometime in the future. Naruto's words reminded Mito of something important. That's right, 2-chan haven't official given you a rank yet. Rank? Muttered Naruto softly as he wondered if the ranking for shinobi were still the same as his time. Mito nodded as she faced Naruto fully. Yes, in our clan, shinobi and kunoichi all have individual ranks, and 2-chan assigns them according to skills. Explained the girl as she looked up to the sky absent-mindedly in thought. Just like the Senju clan, we classify our shinobi as genin, chunin and junin, with the last one being the most skilled. Naruto nodded in understanding while silently glad that the ranking system was the same. Based on what I saw of your skills, I believe you should be a junin. Asuka rose a brow in surprise. Really? Asked the girl to her best friend. He's that strong, he looks to be our age. Naruto looked sheepish as Mito nodded assuringly. Yes, Naruto's skill are definitely good, I'll even say that he might give Tobirama a run for his money. Announced the heiress as Asuka's eyes widened. I'm not so sure with Hashirama, but I know Naruto would be able to hold his own against him. Naruto was a humble man, but the kind words of Mito gave him a jolt of pride. After all, it is not every day that one is praised by the legendary Uzumaki Mito that he could potentially be equal to the Shodai and Nadaime Hokage. But these thoughts brought Naruto to the main question, was he really in the league of the Shodai and Nadaime? Naruto had fought alongside the two great men when they were in their reanimated forms, and he noticed that he was equal with them then, but he no longer had control over Kurama, so that left him on the disadvantage. Although the two Hokages were now normal human and were not as strong as they would be when resurrected, so Naruto would conclude that they were not far off in power. Asuka suddenly had a smirk on her face. Well, you sure have a lot of faith in him, Mito-chan. Is someone crushing on her savior? Asked the girl with wiggling eyebrows. Naruto was amused, but Mito blushed and spluttered at her friend. Quite kidding around, Asuka, cried the embarrassed heiress indignified. I was being serious here. Asuka giggled and crossed her arms together. Well, I was serious as well, and the blush on your face isn't helping your case. Seeing that Mito was getting very flustered, Naruto intervened and saved the poor girl from further awkwardness. That's enough for now, Asuka-san. Mito is already flustered enough, said Naruto casually with a smile on his face. Do you two know of a good ramen stand around here? I am really craving for some. Mito was glad that she was out of the spotlight and nodded to Naruto's question. You have good taste, Naruto. There is a great ramen place here in the village, said Mito with a smile on her face. We go there a lot. Asuka grinned and nodded along. It looks like we have another ramen lover, exclaimed the girl as she linked her arm with Mito's. Let's go pay Ichiya-san another visit. Naruto gladly followed his two fellow Uzumakis through one of the mellow streets in the village. It was reaching evening and the sun was beginning to set, marking the first day of Naruto back in the past. Naruto's own evaluation for his travel to the past has so far been very successful. In less a day he had already joined the Uzumaki clan, which was much faster than the predicted 3 months. It seems that his ancestors' clan was much more lenient than he imagined. Even the leader of the village hadn't suspected him. While it was certainly a good thing for Naruto, he couldn't help but worry for the future of his clan. The Uzumakis were far too trusting, and that might very well lead to their downfall even if they were powerful enough to last through the Great Wars. Naruto was glad that there was so much humanity in his clan, but keeping its best interest in mind, Naruto planned to change the naive vantage point of his clan soon. The last thing Naruto wanted to do was to destroy the integrity and honor that made the Uzumaki clan what it was, but the lack of integrity and honor were small prices to pay in order to stay in existence. Naruto was broken out of his stupor when Mito patted him on the shoulder. "We're here, Naruto," chirped the girl as she pointed up at a small stand named Ichiya's Ramen. Seeing the small ramen stand made Naruto remember his dear surrogate uncle and his daughter. Ichiraku and his daughter had been the surrogate family Naruto desperately needed as a child, and he knew that without them he would have most likely lost himself in darkness. It will always be one of Naruto's greatest regret that he couldn't save them from death during one of Madara's terrible raids. The small ramen stand had been one of the less fortunate structures of Konoha, having been struck by a stray paper bomb fired by one of the Uchiha's minions. Asuka, still linked together with Mito, walked into the stand with a smile on her face. "Hey Ichiya-san, the usual please." Ichiya was a middle-aged man with a kind fatherly look. He was a man with a tall stature and had short red hair that barely reached the back of his neck. He had on an apron that looked to be quite old considering all the grease spots on it, and his body shared the same delightful aroma with his small stand. The man had a smile on his face when he saw two of his regular customers stroll in, and not just because they were here for business. "Mito-chan," exclaimed the man happily as he stopped his cooking to greet Mito properly. "You're home." Mito smiled and nodded happily. "Of course I'm home, just your ramen is enough motivation for me to survive any mission." Ichiya laughed heartedly and nodded. "Have whatever you want today Mito-chan, everything is on the house," exclaimed the man excited. "I am celebrating that one of my best customers made it home safe and sound." Asuka pouted at the man and looked up at him with her puppy dog eyes jutsu. "Ichiya-san, what about me?" The cook laughed and patted Asuka on the head. "Of course you get it for free too, Asuka-chan." Naruto was amused by the whole situation and just sat down next to Mito on her right. It was delightful to see Mito and Asuka being on such good terms with Ichiya. It reminded Naruto of his time with Ichiraku and Ayame. Ichiya finally saw Naruto and noticed that he was with Mito and Asuka. "And who is this handsome young man?" asked the middle-aged man as he looked at Naruto. "Are you either Mito-chan or Asuka-chan's boyfriend?" Mito spluttered as Asuka giggled while Naruto just calmly shook his head negative. "I am not that lucky, Ichiya-san," said the blonde man making Mito blush a little. "I am new in the village and these girls told me you have great ramen, so I decided to tag along." Ichiya nodded with a smile before Asuka crept up against the table. "This is Uzumaki Naruto, he is the one who saved Mito on her mission," said the girl while grinning. Mito nodded and Ichiya turned to Naruto with a big smile. "Oh," yelled the man suddenly. "You saved Mito-chan." Naruto nodded discreetly. "Hi." Ichiya let out a hearty laugh. "Well, it seems that I won't be charging a single person tonight," exclaimed the man as Mito and Asuka giggled. "Friends get occasional complimentary dinners from me, and anyone who saved Mito-chan is a friend of mine." Naruto chuckled and nodded. "Thank you very much, Ichiya-san." After enjoying a delicious meal of ramen with Mito and Asuka, Naruto returned to his new home and relaxed in his bed. The ramen Ichiya made was delightful. It was almost as good as Ichiraku's, but in the end, nothing will ever be as good as Ichiraku in Naruto's mind. The Uzumaki man had spent a few minutes hanging up the paintings that he bought, and placing some delicate decorations around the house. And 1 hour before midnight, Naruto made it to bed and enjoyed a night of carefree sleep. The mornings of the village was filled with hummingbirds singing a peaceful song for the early risers, and that included Naruto. It was perhaps out of wartime habit, but Naruto was glad that he woke up in time to listen to a symphony of chirps from his friendly neighbors out on his porch. Being close to nature had become a habit to Naruto in recent years, and he had developed a habit of sleeping atop of trees instead of a tent when traveling through a forest. He just found it more serene. "This is good coffee," mumbled Naruto quietly to himself as he enjoyed a cup of steaming goodness in his living room. Already, Naruto could sense many people passing by the street just beyond his front door, going on early missions for the clan. During dinner the previous night, Naruto had learnt from Mito and Asuka that the shinobi corps of the village was entirely made out of Uzumaki members. There was not one shinobi that was not an Uzumaki in the force, and that surprised Naruto. Seeing how loose the suspicion was with the higher-ups of the village, Naruto expected the village to allow refugees of other clans to join, but apparently the village was quite strict when it came to non-Uzumaki members. Naruto just shook his head at how bad his village was handling its power. While being kind and helpful to Uzumaki members were good, it allows a rift to exist in the security of the village. If one could find a defected Uzumaki, they could very well send him back to the village as a spy, and the village would easily let him in. Then being very strict of foreign shinobi would limit the power the clan had within. If the Uzumaki were willing to accept some defected shinobi from other clans, it would promote diversity in the force and create innovation. Being such a isolationist was not exactly ideal to the island-bound clan. A sudden knock on his front door pulled Naruto out of his train of thought. "Who is it?" asked Naruto as he opened the door. On his front doorstep was surprisingly Uzumaki Mito. "Hey Naruto, good morning." Naruto smiled at the sight of the beautiful Mito and nodded. "Good morning to you too, Mito," said the man as he opened his door fully. "Please come in." Mito nodded and walked inside the home with a bow. "Sorry for bothering you so early in the morning, Naruto." The blonde man waved her off with a smile. "No problem at all, I am an early riser, and I love your company." The Uzumaki heiress smiled and clapped her hands together. "I am actually here today to summon you to Tu-chan's office," chirped the girl excitedly. "It seems that Tu-chan had decided to test your strength today so he could officially offer you a rank." Naruto smiled in the prospect of fighting some of his fellow Uzumakis and nodded. "That's great, I've been meaning for a nice fight," announced Naruto with a smirk. "Let's go." Mito remained motionless and stopped Naruto with a hand. "Wait, shouldn't you change first?" asked the girl as she eyes Naruto's sleeping attire, just a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. Naruto smirked and made a hand sign. "Kai," chanted the man as his body was suddenly covered by a puff of smoke, and when it cleared he revealed Naruto changed into a battle uniform. Naruto's outfit consisted of a whole body, black combat suit, knee-length combat boots, a pair of arm braces, fingerless gloves, and a black combat vest that protected his torso. This was Naruto's usual fighting uniform in the war, and it had done him well in recent years, so Naruto decided to bring it back with him. Mito was surprised and had a look of bewilderment on her face. "Sugoi," chirped the girl as she jumped up with a smile. "Can you teach me how to do that?" Naruto chuckled and patted Mito's head like she was a child. "Sure thing, Mito." Like the day before, Naruto headed towards the large structure that contained the office of the leader of the village. The place was rather close to Naruto's home, it was just a 5-minute walk away. There was a clean straight road that led directly to the building, and scenery in between were things that Naruto will learn to cherish. It was still early in the morning and people were just starting to set up their shops and stands, and the sight made Naruto feel like he was back in Konoha again. Making it to the main office 5 minutes later, Naruto followed behind Mito into the ever-winding hallways to the place once again. The blonde Uzumaki was excited to test his power against another Uzumaki. He wanted to see if their Fuinjutsu was really as powerful as he had heard. Knocking a few times on the marble double door, Mito walked in with Naruto close behind. "Good morning, Tu-chan, I brought Naruto," announced Mito as she stood beside her mother just like the day before. Genryusai and Retsu both smiled a little at the young man. "How was your first night here at home, Naruto-kun?" asked the aged man kindly. Naruto smiled and bowed a little. "It was great, I am already loving this village." Retsu had a smile of her own and gave a slight nod. That is good, we're glad. Ginryusai cleared his throat to signal that the casual conversation was over. So, I assume Mito-chan had already told you the purpose of your coming here today. Naruto nodded. Hi. Ginryusai smirked and stood up. Good, said the man as he walked toward the door. Follow me, Naruto-kun. The blonde Uzumaki was rather confused but listened to his leader's words either way. As they walked back out the main office in its building, Naruto looked back and gave Mito a silent question, to which she just shrugged with a playful smile on her face. The walk continued on for another few minutes until the group of Uzumakis reached the edge of the village. Staring out, Naruto saw a vast field that looked to be a training ground with all its targets and equipment in place. As Naruto followed his leader into the large area, he was surprised to see that some people had already gathered at the edge of the field. He saw Asuka and the small boy that hugged Mito at the entrance the day before. If he had to guess, Naruto could say that there were almost 50 people waiting for them, and from what he could sense, most of them were shinobi. These people are here to watch you, Naruto-kun, said Genryusai without looking back at the young man. They all want to see how powerful is the man who saved the heiress. Naruto nodded and inwardly sighed. He really didn't want to extra attention so early, he still didn't have enough understanding of his power to demonstrate it in front of people yet. In order to gain power and respect within the clan, Naruto first had to prove himself as a skilled shinobi, so he must not fail to impress in front of such a large crowd. Genryusai walked Naruto straight to the center of the battlefield as Mito and Retsu stopped and joined the rest of the observants. This test is to measure your skill, and what rank I should bestow you afterwards, explained the leader with a serious look on his face. Please do the best you can, and if things go out of control, I will stop the battle. The leader of the clan made his way back to the crowd as he spoke. Given your suggested prowess as a shinobi, I have increased the level of difficulty. Good luck, Naruto-kun. Naruto stood motionlessly in the midst of the training field, and he could already sense 5 signatures around him. Silently, Naruto focused his chakra and readied himself to unseal his Hiraishin kunai or his katana when needed. Suddenly, 5 shadows emerged from the trees and landed on all sides of Naruto, creating a perfect pentacle around him. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he saw the masks on the men's faces. He knew then that he was up against one of the Anbu teams of the Uzumaki clan. The blonde man smirked inwardly. His leader really thought well of his skills given that he ordered a match between him and 5 other people who were on the same team. Mito, on the sidelines with Asuka and Ren, gasped. What is this? Muttered the girl as she looked at her friend. I thought it was the regular one-on-one. Mito's question though, was left unanswered as everyone was focused on the fight. Naruto remained motionless and there was not a shred of fear in his eyes. His expression showed the face of a warrior, a man that was unfazed with the challenge presented to him. The blonde Uzumaki smirked and finally got down into a combat position. Come on. At once, all 5 members of the Anbu team moved in swift coordination as they all unstethed their blades and charged at Naruto. Each member attacked at a 75-degree angle to the right, effectively sealing off all openings of their team attack. The reflection of the blades flashed on the face of Naruto, and a split second before the attack could hit him, he quickly jumped up into the air. It seems that the Anbu team was used to such dodging techniques and instantly reacted to Naruto's newfound height. Suiryuden no Jutsu, cried one member as another member unsealed some water from a scroll. The water formed into the shape of a dragon and it charged straight at Naruto the instant it gained momentum. Naruto formed a quick hand sign. Futon. Kazukiri no Jutsu, muttered the blonde man as he slashed his hand down and sent an invisible blade of wind straight through the water dragon. The blade of wind continued its path downwards and sliced into the ground as the 2 Anbu members jumped back. The 3 other members of the team jumped up and hovered just above Naruto with their swords ready. Again, cried Naruto as he twisted his body in midair and slashed another blade of wind at his opponents. The Anbu members were not ready for that and tried as best as they could to lean backwards. The blade missed them by a tiny margin, but their blades were sliced clean in half. Naruto landed back on the ground and focused his attention to the two ABNU members in front of him. The blonde man unsealed his katana from his wrist and channeled his wind chakra through the blade. A familiar vibration coursed through his arm as he held his blade to his side and ran towards his opponents at high speed. Before the two Anbu members could react, Naruto destroyed the swords in their hands and gave each of them a nasty cut on the shoulder. Grunts of pain could be heard from the two Anbu members as blood spewed out of their body. "Good try," whispered Naruto as he sped between them and landed two punches on their temples at lightning speed. The two men were instantly knocked out and fell to the ground unconscious. Naruto sensed the other three very close behind him and spun backwards quickly. Naruto's blade sliced through their kunais and forced them back a few steps. "Futon! Atsugai!" cried Naruto as a dome of condensed wind surrounded his body before it blasted forward at crushing velocity. The ground tore apart from the heavy wind and one of the three Anbu members was blasted into the distance, while the other two managed to pull off a Kawarimi no Jutsu. Off to the sidelines, people were watching in shock as Naruto effortlessly dismantled the Anbu team like they were a genin team. Genryusai himself was shocked to see that even with the increased difficulty, Naruto still fight as if he was not trying at all. Genryusai himself was rather proud of his Anbu teams as they were powerful and always got the job done, but today was not the case. Retsu was equally shocked. She assumed that Naruto would be very powerful and would be able to pass the test, but she expects some difficulty, not she utter ease. Mito had a smirk on her face as she saw the shocked faces of the people around her. She had personally seen Naruto's prowess as a ninja, and the battle with the Anbu team did not push Naruto to use the jutsu he used against the Uchiha. Mito didn't even know why she was worried for Naruto before. She knew better than anyone present that Naruto would be able to battle the Anbu team with relative ease. The two remaining members appeared behind Naruto and flared their chakra. Kaden. Ryuden no Jutsu. Futon. Datopa. The mixture of the two elemental attacks created a large inferno that reached the height of 50 feet into the air, and it barreled towards Naruto at blinding speeds. The wind made the fire much faster and hotter. The jutsu was scorching the ground beneath it as it traveled towards its intended target. Naruto smirked and unsealed a scroll of his own. "Time to show my fuinjutsu," thought Naruto silently as he unsealed a pen from the scroll. The crowd of Uzumakis watched in amazement as Naruto started to write with his pen in the air. Very quickly, in an instant, there was a fire seal hovering in the air, in between Naruto and the burning inferno. As the fire made contact with the seal, Naruto placed his palm directly at the center of his seal, and the fire chakra within jutsu started to break down as it was absorbed into the seal. Every seal needed a container of some sort, and in this case, by placing his palm at the center of his custom seal, Naruto would absorb the chakra of the two Anbu members and use it as his own. Naruto had made this sort of fuinjutsu after he faced off against Hirako, a man who recreated the Maiden Kekkei Genkei, which he used to absorb, manipulate, and release chakra taken from an opponent. Naruto found the idea great adaptable to fuinjutsu, and he recreated a subversion of the ability using his sealing ink and wind chakra to make the seal hover in front of his palm. The two Anbu members were shocked to see their jutsu disappear and couldn't react fast enough. Naruto smirked as he appeared in front of the two Anbu members. "Here is your chakra back," muttered the man as he pushed his hands forward and a blast of flames and wind struck the two members at point blank. The blast instantly knocked out and probably badly injured the two Anbu members. The two Anbu members were sent flying backwards a good distance before they fell to the ground in a beaten heap. All were quiet as Naruto turned back to a speechless crowd. "Well," started the blonde Uzumaki. "Does this mean I am a Junin?"